guys, this is Miss White. I'm coming to you today to read Chapter 6 of The World According to Humphrey. Chapter 6 is titled Moonlight Madness. I waited until the school was completely quiet. No students, no teachers, no Mr. Morales. Then I got busy because I had a lot of work to do, big work for a small hamster. First, I took the Moonlighters Club clippings out of my notebook, holding it in my mouth. I opened the lock that doesn't lock and scurried across the table. Getting down off the table was still a problem. I grabbed hold of the leg and slid down, as I've done before. It makes me feel a little queasy in my tummy, but it would be worthwhile if I could get Aldo a girlfriend. I hurried over to the big machine, which was very, very high off the ground. It seemed impossible for me to get up there, but I had it all planned out in my mind. Crawl up the wastebasket. Oh, I didn't know it would sway like that. Leap over the seats of Mrs. Brisbane's chair. Whoa, slippery. Crawl up the rungs of the chalkboard tray behind it, along the chalkboard tray to the bookcase, then the hardest part, the dive. From the bookcase to the overhead projector cart. If you ever try it yourself, don't look down. I was practically home free, but I still had to get up to the lit part. Still holding the newspaper clippings in my mouth, I grabbed a big screw sticking out of the side and pulled myself up. Then I reached up as high as I could and just barely managed to touch the top. Good thing I've got big muscles because I was able to pull myself up. I was there. I was like climbing Mount McKinley, the tallest mountain peak in the United States. I quickly pushed the switch. I wish I had some sunglasses because I was suddenly surrounded by a blinding light. It was like being inside a light bulb. I took the newspaper clippings out of my mouth and carefully laid it on the flat glass. Then I looked up at the wall. No, no, no. Up on the screen was a picture of a car, and behind it there was jumbled up backwards writing. I realized I must have laid the clippings on the glass upside down. I quickly turned it over, and there it was, all the information about the Moonlighters Club, right there on the wall, with the outline of the car behind it. Aldo would be coming soon, so I hurried back to the cage. It was faster getting back because it was mostly downhill until the very end, when I had to swing my way up the cord, the blinds, and the back of the table. I was panting pretty hard. By the time I closed the cage door behind me, I didn't even have time to catch my breath before Aldo swung the door open. Whoa! Who left that on? He exclaimed as he entered. The thing could overheat. He hurried over to the overhead projector. Look at the wall. Look up at the wall. I squeaked by the words of the sound like a hamster. Aldo didn't waste a second. He flicked the machine off. All the work for nothing. But then, a funny thing happened. Aldo turned the machine back on and looked. What's this? He muttered. Why did Mrs. Brisbane have this up here? Hey, nice car. He squinted at the screen. Look, Humphrey, the Moonlighters Club for people who work at night, like me, and I thought I was still quite exhausted from all the effort. Aldo started a big ad on the wall for a while. Then he turned off the projector and went to work and never mentioned it again. Yes, I was annoyed. I had failed, but at least I had tried, which was more than I can say for one classmate. Yes, Sae, with his very own ears, I had heard the promise, Mrs. Brisbane, that she would raise her hand in class, but so far she'd been as silent as a statue. Her week was almost up, even though I had scolded her the day she fed me. She paid no attention to me, and she had to her teacher. She should really listen to her teacher, even Mrs. Brisbane, and you should always listen to your hamster. I was worried about Aldo and about Saeed, but I had to admit, my journey had been so tiring that, nocturnal or not, I slept soundly the rest of the night. The next day began the very surprising way. "I had something to share with you," Mrs. Brisbane announced. She held the postcard with the picture of colorful parrots perched in a lush green trees, a postcard from Mrs. McNair. Mrs. Brisbane would never call her Miss Mac, it says. "Greetings to my favorite class in the world, room 26. I am now in the school here in Brazil. This country is beautiful and friendly, and I really enjoy talking with parrots and rainforests. I miss you all, especially my pal Humphrey. Lots of love, Miss Mac." Happy, happy, happy. Not only did Miss Mac remember me, she missed me. And most of all, oh, I missed her most of all, too, especially every time I looked at Mrs. Brisbane. And she glared back at me. Mrs. Brisbane showed us Brazil on the map, and it's far away. I'd like to be that far away from Mrs. Brisbane. My head was so filled with memories of Miss Mac that I got 75% of my vocabulary test. After we graded the test in class, Mrs. Brisbane said, "If you got 100% on the test, please raise your hand." That woke me up. What a clever way to get Sae to raise her hand, because she always made 100. AJ raised his hand. Art raised his hand. Sae just stared down at her desk. I was starting to get really mad at her. When it was time for the map work, Mrs. Brisbane on the overhead projector, and there it was, the Moonlighters Club, and right on the wall. Mrs. Brisbane wrinkled her nose, picked up the paper, and looked at both sides. Then she held it up to the light, and I think maybe she noticed those little tiny holes my teeth had made as I carried it over there. Mrs. Brisbane looked over at my cage and wrinkled her nose. Then she crumpled the paper and threw it in the wastebasket. "She's smart, but she's also mean. She's not the only one." While she went on with her map work, "Wait for the Bell," Garth Tungwell started back some of the rude noises. Mrs. Brisbane didn't even turn around when someone started giggling. She just said, "Stop giggling, Gail." So Garth's rude noises got louder and even ruder, and a lot of the other kids giggled along with Gail. So Garth's rude noises got louder and even ruder. A lot of the kids giggled along with Gail. Suddenly, the teacher spun around to face them. "Very well, the whole class will stay in during recess for extra vocabulary words," she announced. Everybody groaned. "It's Garth's fault," said Heidi. "Raise your hand." Mrs. Brisbane snapped back. "You will all stay in during recess unless the person who is making the noise wants to step forward and admit it." Nobody said a word, but everybody glared at Garth, including me. "Okay, I did it," he said. "Raise your hand," Heidi whispered loudly. "Very well. Garth, you and Heidi and Gail will stay in during recess," the teacher said firmly. Heidi and Gail protested until the bell rang, but all three of them stayed in during recess. Instead of making them do extra vocabulary words, though, Mrs. Brisbane let them rest their head on their desk after she lectured them about the behavior, of course. All the commotion made me a little hungry, and for some reason I hadn't been fed yet. So I decided to squeak up myself. Mrs. Brisbane turned and pointed to me angrily. "I didn't need any trouble from you either," she said. Heidi raised her hand. "I don't think he's been fed today," she said. Mrs. Brisbane told Garth to feed me. Then she dismissed the girls and told them to go outside and play for the rest of recess, so she wasn't completely mean to them anyway. She even trusted Garth to be alone in a room while she took some papers down the office. "I've always liked to wait for the bell, Garth, so I was surprised when she started grumbling at me as he filled the water bottle and put some fresh mealworms in the cage. One of these days you'll get in trouble too, he said. I'll see to that. Everybody hates me. Everybody loves me. You're just a rat in disguise. The words hurt me a lot. Why would Garth say that? I mean, sure, almost everybody does love me, but I don't make rude noises and get other people in trouble. I was still pondering Garth's behavior when the classmates returned to room 26. Mrs. Brisbane must have gotten rested up over the recess because she greeted me with a smile. I have a surprise for you, she told the kids. Surprise always gets the class's attention. They think surprises are always good. However, I know a surprise can sometimes be bad. Like the day Mrs. Mack left me forever, we're going to pick who gets to take Humphrey home for the weekend. Now, you all know whether or not your parents gave you permission to bring him home. So if you'd like Humphrey for the weekend, raise your hand. You should have seen all the hands that went up. I could hardly believe my eyes. Miranda and Heidi and AJ and every single hand in the class except Garth. Even Saeed raised her hand. Mrs. Brisbane noticed. Saeed, do you think it will be all right with your parents? She asked. She nodded. I can't hear you, said Mrs. Brisbane. Yes, ma'am, said Saeed. It was strange to hear her voice in the classroom. Mrs. Brisbane gave her a note to bring back with her family on Friday. I napped the rest of the afternoon, but whenever I woke up and glanced over at her desk, I saw her doing something I'd never seen before, smiling. Tip 6. You can leave your hamster alone for for a day or two. Otherwise, find a suitable caretaker. Or, if possible, take your hamster with you in its own cage. A hamster can be very portable.